Oh, no. Another frigging book. 114 pages, so this one might be a short one. Boy. I'm going to try and be a lot less angry about this one. I know the last 3 books I did, Just Listen, Talking to Crazy Eye, I got a bit irate. I don't know whether it's worth mentioning my own personal journey, but I've, through taking a couple of days since listening to those books, realised that anger and frustration is really only about an annoyance or an insistence or some kind of refusal or denial in respect of not being able to do something. So if the Myers-Briggs type indicators is correct in its assumption, if nonviolent communication model is also correct in its assumption, all people are really saying is, please help me see things, or please help me have perception. And then thank you. Because of that, I was able to make a decision and change my life. Myers-Briggs has as its 2 modes of operation, a perception filter and a decision filter, which is to say all of our cognitive stack is really an imaginary pigeonholing of cognitive functions, some called introverted, some called extroverted, some called sensing, some called perceiving, judging, whatever they are. And so, again, the presumption there is that our preferred cognitive functions that are associated with our individual stack is associated with how we perceive the world and how we make decisions in it. So are we perceiving things externally or are we perceiving things internally? And in response to that, we make decisions. So getting irate and people who are defensive and confrontational, and we all don't like it. I don't like confrontation, but I've realised it's my style because I've realised I don't have the skill or aptitude or even ideas about how to change my perceptions and reach different decisions. And because of that, I stick to my ways. I'm very inflexible, which means that anybody that comes to me offering a different perspective, now you're wrong. Anybody who insists on perhaps me getting out of my comfort zone and taking a risk and making a decision that's so far served me well, no, I ain't doing that because that doesn't fit with my perception and my decision strategies. So I can't possibly. And I've not been one of those arseholes who go around saying, no, you're right, you're wrong, or you ought to do this, you ought to do that. As I've explained in the other audios, I leave people to make their own mistakes because who am I to tell them how they ought to run their lives or how they ought to do things? It's in their context, according to their discovery, and it may even work out correct. Sometimes I've stood back and just watched people do decisions that I dare not make, and they've had great success with it, and I don't begrudge them. In some ways there's a bit of jealousy and envy. Conversely, we've all seen people make horrendous mistakes, and you just can't tell them because they're so attached to their perceptions and very attached or addicted even to their decision strategy. And this seems to be the roundabout circle of life: perception, decision, and attachment to it. And now why are we attached to it? I don't know. Some say ego. I don't even know what that is. I keep asking people. There's no real good description of what that is. And I think it was a useful point for Freud to get started in psychology, and it was a useful model. It got us going. Jung did a lot of good work off the back of that. And, you know, half-life of facts in psychology, I think, is only 7 years. I think like medical science is about up to 50 or 60. Half-life of information, by the way, is a notion whereby you state a number of years that specifies how long it would take us to discover that half of the whole body of information that we knew was wrong. So you can appreciate something that has a half-life of 50 years means that if it takes us 50 years to prove what we thought we knew, half of it wrong, then odds are it's pretty good. It's going to take us 50 years to find out half of it was wrong, whereas 7 years means that, yeah, there's still quite a lot wrong in there, and we are correcting it half of it every 7 years, which is good. You know, it's a young field. We're just getting going. Behavioural economics, brain scanning, all this good stuff. I used to follow a couple of neuroscientists on Periscope when that was still a thing. Fascinating stuff. The guy being there in the lab doing experiments on the brain, and he'd be lighting it up using dyes and tracers and all sorts, and be broadcasting it via Periscope. It was publicly funded, so he said, as far as I'm concerned, it's publicly funded. You taxpayers have paid for it, so it's yours. Fascinating stuff. I mean, who'd imagined that you're an observer in a neuroscience lab, across the other side of the world. Fabulous. Yeah, so I got to thinking that when we hold on to our perceptions or our decision strategy, it makes it all about us. We're defending something, we're resistant to change, or at least even resistant to looking at things in a different way. And I suspect that means that because at the back of our mind we know that if we start to see things differently, we'll be forced, almost obligated, even if we use our same decision strategy, to make different decisions. And that means change. And who knows how that's going to turn out. And there's the rub. Asking ourselves, who knows how that's going to turn out, is an expression of another perception filter about the consequences of change. So it seems like it's one of those things that you have to let go of and have full faith in your own capacity of being able to reframe whatever presents using your new cognitive stack, or being able to handle due to your new skills and decision-making capabilities. Because decisions seem binary, you can't sort of decide, and perceptions seem analog. Sort of, it is not quite black and white, but a lot of grey. But the decisions we make from that are binary. You either did do it or you didn't, or you did decide or you didn't. We can linger in this kind of mental masturbation of, let me think about and let me cognise on my perceptions, rather than making decisions. And although it's, I suppose, insightful, masturbatory, doesn't move us forward. Well, again, I say as I'm speaking for myself, I wouldn't dare to impose upon anyone else. And perhaps this is another failing as well. Like I told a story in some of the other audios about when I was younger, hanging around the pool halls, and the women would come in asking, can you teach me how to play pool? Taking them literally at their word, I did teach them how to play pool, but what they were actually asking was something else. And it bothered me that this seemed to be a social norm, that they're asking for a close physical contact, to lean over them, put an arm around them and pretend that I was showing them how to play pool. But it bothered me. It bothered me that it bothered me because they had to make this facade. It bothers me in the sense of, alright, I'm a man obviously, so I don't have the female experience, but it bothers me that, is this the lengths that women have to go to ask in such strange ways for, hey, can I have a hug? Because that's, you dirty slut. You're always going around all these different men asking for hugs. But when it has the facade of, no, I was just asking him to teach pool, and he took a little bit of a liberty there by standing over me the way he did and rubbing against me the way he did, and it wasn't me, it was him. Well, boys will be boys, and then it's excused. So I get where it's all coming from, but it even bothered me then. I thought, there seems a very different way, disparity in how men ask for things and how women ask for things. Here we are, 2020. I hope we're all modern feminists and understand what the male gaze is and understand about power structures. And it seems that the Gen Y, Gen Zs, millennials certainly do, and that's all good. Well done on you. Yeah, good job. Fuck the nuclear family. Am I right? Trans rights. Yeah. I mean, if you're in any doubt, go on Tinder, take a picture of yourself, and this is the guys I'm talking to, and then use a style GAN filter and feminize your face. They're pretty good now. You can actually take photos and apply style transfers from neural networks that make it a very convincing transformation into a photorealistic rendition of a woman. Go on there and see the shit you have to put up with. It's fucking horrendous. And as guys, yeah, you think it's a laugh. From the other side, it's just, well, you try it, see how it feels, and then think about LinkedIn and Facebook. And yeah, what is this assumption that we have that we can talk to people like that? It brings me onto the subject. Just listen. So these are fast audios. These aren't scripted like the longer audios, and I'm not editing out my ums and ahs either, so I'll be pausing for thought, and sometimes it's not as smooth as the flagship videos on the channel. So the assumption is that we are social animals. Some of us are. And the question, well, let's start with a paradox. Are you a good listener? If you say yes, you clearly haven't heard the question. If you say no, well, that just creates ambiguity all over, because that the person asking the question might mean that you're not a good listener. But you might recognise, actually, you know what, I've gone on this course, I know about channels, I know about mirroring, I know matching, and I know predicates, I'm aware of leading questions, thought terminating cliches, I know about tonality, and I know about eye movements and all this stuff. Sensory acuity. So you might know a lot more than the average, and then in that respect you realise how much more there is available. And so you are actually quite qualified to say, no, I'm not actually a good listener. I might be very much beyond average, but still by no means good. Of course, the good listener would say, that's an interesting question that you said there in a kind of inquisitory tone. I'm curious to know more. Tell me about that question. Who are you? There's no real answer to that question either, is it? I mean, you can answer it at any level. You can say about your identity. You can try and pick apart the ultimate nominalization of I. Whatever I am is, contains, is assembled from. And then, of course, who is the I that recognizes the I behind the I? I'm not talking about I's that we used to see, but capital I. Or we can say in terms of our identities, our beliefs, what we do, job, work, what role we play, father, policeman, brain surgeon, cyberneticist, and a currently very unfashionable right-wing Republican politician, let's say, I don't know. But also, this description can be related in terms of, relations, not only how you identify with self or what you do, where you are, but also in terms of relational status, single, independent, alone, single parent, and then all the gender expressions. Language, beautiful thing. Social creatures. Remember, all that's been said is please and thank you. And when people express how they identify, how they describe themselves, how they perceive themselves, who are you to come along and say, no, you're not. Actually, my perception of who and what you are is the de facto, final, and correct way to describe yourself. But it seems also we have advantage because we can read books, we can watch films, we can hear stories, and we can get a perception, an experience of life beyond ourselves. We can hear stories of cultures in faraway lands that might not immediately make sense to us, and we might have a temptation to go over there and order that according to our perceptions as well. Yeah, what's all that about? Oh, oil, money, US dollars, yeah, of course, I forgot. Or maybe it's coltan or lithium from the so-called ABC corridor. Who knows? Maybe that's harsh. Yeah, cynicism, it's a bad habit. And I don't know whether I caught it in time before it hardened to misanthropy, but maybe. Yeah, so I mean, this is a thing they teach you in NLP about first position, second position, third position perspectives. So, I mean, I go on about NLP is just, it's contained in the framework, but for those that don't know what NLP is a bunch of guys in the late 60s, early 70s got together and noticed that some people in therapeutic settings and some counsellors and some speakers and lecturers managed to help people achieve excellent results, like helping people get out of a phobia, like helping people in abusive relationships or so-called drama triangles, and they saw the patterns and knew how to break them or break people out or educate them or how to rewire their brain so they didn't react to the stimulus in the same way, thus offering different perspective, different choice architecture. And then they just wrote down, hey, how did you do that? All right, these are the rules for changing people's perspective, and these are the rules for offering people changing strategy or decision making. And they codified all that, and kind of like the rules that were codified from those investigations kind of wrapped up in this framework called NLP. There's just some standard models in there. It's nothing that no one hasn't noticed over the last 10,000 years. I mean, if you look at the early Disney cartoons of the 20s, the eye movements in the cartoons were spot on, but the NLP eye movement wasn't coded until, I think, the 70s. So it was always there. It's just someone noticed it and wrote it down in a different format than an early cartoon. So it's not even that it's anything new. It's just, anyway, it gets a bit of a bad rap, but whatever. So I'm told that the ability to perceive and identify with another person's perspective is often called empathy. And it seems to be important to people to have empathy. Gosh, there's just so little of it around. And what do we do when people are asking for empathy? Please see things from my perspective. Please help me see things in a new way, because I'm stuck. Thank you for seeing things my way. That makes my life more wonderful. Thank you for helping me find new decision strategies. I've now been able to change my life. But it also has to be at the invite. We shouldn't go around telling people that they ought to have new perspective and think like us, because, well, that's just a power play. That's just authoritarian, totalitarian bullshit. It's half a goose step away from fascism. And probably I've discovered people who want to impose their order of the world on other people. It seems that the other people often have a much wider gamut of perception, a much wider gamut of requisite variety. And people don't like this because it means that they have to change now, that they can't remain stuck in their ways. The world's changed. And, but they want to carry on living it like it's the 1950s, which is all that bullshit. That's a bit of a myth as well. It harks back to a time that never existed. It seems something that's coming through the zeitgeist at the moment. Oh, do you remember the 1950s when blah, blah? No, again, these are perceptions that are put out there on the silver screen. And back then, just like as in with NLP and all its codified rules for change, back then, the filmmakers and financiers of the film and the kind of unwritten rules were that we had to project this ideal lifestyle, that the villain could never win, that we never saw blood on the screen, that kind of thing. But these ideas are still around, but they're Hollywood myths. They're perceptions people have got hold of and want to get attached to because it seems to offer a simpler life. And who doesn't want that, of course? But it's a myth, it's a lie, it's a deceivement, probably to sell you something. Or maybe to influence you to vote a certain way. And I think I've mentioned this before as well. It only recently occurred to me what tone meant in terms of films. We talk about film tone. And it's how it makes you feel, or how it invites you to feel. What is, and that's the trick, because it does presents images on a screen, prevents sound coming out of a speaker, yet you're invited to fill in the third bit, how to feel. And it gets a bit dicey, because whilst that's a free choice, of course, filmmakers, the clever ones, the really good ones, they pull your tonality this way and that, and then kind of set it up against each other so that you are kind of guided through an emotional roller coaster, unless you're watching a Michael Bay film and then it's just all go. Interspersed with, gratuitous male gaze, cinematography, whatever. So here's the thing. I've read that our brains respond to even watching other people do things, so that we become empathic with them. So, for example, when we're watching somebody being softly stroked on the cheek, some texts say that we can imagine having that sensation on our cheek, and that our brain lights up similarly. And you see, this is where I fall out of bed with it. I don't experience it like that, because I'm thinking, well, what does a hand feel? And the fact that these texts and people who say this mention that we can appreciate and get tuned in of what that must feel like on our face, it tells me that they've got a romanticized notion about some attachment, because if they were honest about it and they really believed it, they'd consider not only what it must feel like to have our cheek strokes, but also what our hand must feel like stroking someone else's cheek. But they always miss one of those out. So I wonder, again, male gaze, a similar thing. It's from someone's perspective. And in that sense, it's a narrative, it's a story, and I question whether it's objective. Someone's looking for it. Some of the text also says people with a relative lack of visibility have profound problems in relating to others. Over here, me, I always get the wrong end of the stick. I don't know what that's all about. Some say it's built into us to read and guess what other people are thinking and experiencing. And again, I think this is a romanticized notion of wanting to be able to do that, because I've discovered You don't know. We don't know. We can guess, but we're wrong. The complexities of identity, human cognition, values, beliefs, the number of combinations alone is astronomical. I've listed a few value stacks, value hierarchies of people. And when you start looking at just limiting it to, say, the top 10, I don't know how many different rankings there are just from a top 10, but how many different values can you think of? It's hundreds. So even someone's top 10 is not necessarily going to be coincident in the very values that are elicited. Integrity might not make it into a top 10 of some other people. So there are so many, and that's just on values, let alone things like beliefs, cognitive filters, meta filters, and all the other things, and preferred rep channels, introverted, extroverted, sensing, perceiving, judging, whatever it is. I suppose the conclusion is what makes us unique. So I think it's also wise to consider that whilst we think we might get it, we should also hold in our minds that we can also be wrong, very wrong. In fact, just do the quick calculation in your own head. How many different combinations of people are there? And what's the likelihood that you've guessed the right combination of what they're thinking? It's more likely you've got it wrong. But again, I'm amazed that people seem to have the perception that they know somehow. And it's like, fuck, do you? How? Again, it's another perception looking for a decision. So I'm willing to guess at this early stage that empathic listening isn't about reaching conclusions, isn't about making guesses as to what people are thinking. Like I illustrated with the opening question, are you a good listener? Either yes or no proves that you're not. Because there's obviously an intent behind asking the question, and there's an appeal for a communication there. And that's why I say that the person who might respond with something like, how long have you been thinking about asking that question? What information is it that you're looking to achieve by asking that kind of question? What's on your mind? What are you thinking? Where do you want to go with that question? What are you trying to get to? Is signs of a good listener, although there's a lot of questions, but it's focusing on what's going on in the mind of the other person. It doesn't assume that we know, and therefore, because of our mind-reading capabilities, that's an equivalence of good listening. And it always puzzled me as well. Years and years ago, I used to watch The X Factor when I was around friends' houses, various parts of the country. X Factor would be on before the party got started. And I remember there was a guy called Ewan. And what was he singing? I think he was singing a Michael Jackson song. And he sang it, and it was pretty good. And I turned to a few people who were watching, and I said, yeah, that was pretty good. A few timing issues, though, I thought. And they all looked at me like, John, you can't sing. Well, how can you possibly put a comment? And it never made sense to me. The singing bit comes out of the mouth. The noise bit goes in the ears. You can be a good listener but a shit singer. And I don't know whether you can be a good singer but crap hearing. I suspect that you have to have good ears to hear what it's supposed to sound like so that you can zone in on your own projections, or at least some benchmark of what a good note sounds like. So I don't know whether the reverse is necessarily true, but I certainly hold it to be true that just because I can't sing myself, or it's not trained, doesn't mean that my hearing is impaired. And lo and behold, not 3 seconds later, Simon Cowell said, yeah, that was pretty good, a few timing issues. And I just thought, go fuck yourselves. and this conflation always, that people are so quick to criticise. Oh, what do you know about singing? Well, nothing, but I can hear when a note's off. I mean, I don't even know what a note is. I don't even know what note is singing, but it sounds flat. You can tell it's in the tone. I don't even know what quality it is, but you can hear it. And you can hear when it drifts in and out of rhythm with the music. And I think this is perhaps why someone like Aretha Franklin or Dionne Warwick were phenomenal singers, because they led the music. I'm convinced that if you listen to their voices, they are 25, 30 milliseconds ahead of the music. And it makes them lead the song rather than be a fraction of a second behind the song. And I think you consciously not aware of it. You just know that there's something different about it. But that's my suspicion anyway. But I don't know anything about music. But again, it's fascinating, isn't it? Ask people what their favourite kind of music is, and when they say electronica and dance, you're talking to, at the moment, probably someone in their late 40s. Dubstep, maybe in the 30s. And fucking jazz is making a resurgence. Holy shit. Rock and roll, teddies, mods and rockers and I don't know, something happened on 2020. The rock music died. Where did it go? It just seems like there's no rock music anymore. Even playing the old and goldies now of the 60s, 70s, late 70s, early 80s. Freddie Mercury. It's just, I don't know whether it's because I'm picking up that they're using them on TV adverts and that devalues it just to sell you some baby wipes or something, or to go to some fucking park somewhere. But it just devalues because some of these songs were epoch events, markers in time in history that are just kind of transcendental. Like they say, if you were at Woodstock, that's all you need to say. So I think understanding is walking into someone else's perceptual position. So we've got to get out of our first position, walk over there to their side, turn around, step in their shoes, take on their thoughts, and understand what's going on in their head. It's not so easy because the temptation is to go over there, turn around, and displace their body with ours and pretend that that's second position, but it's not. It's to take on all their perceptions, their values, and to try and predict how they would react, not how we wish they would react according to our perspective stacks. It's not so easy. I think I'll do as part one. Also, on a personal note, pretty tired. I think I need some shut eye. Alright, we'll pick it up next time.